On today's episode of Locked On Oilers, the skating groups have split in half. So we're going to talk about the NHL and the AHL skating groups today. Plus, we are going to take a look at the preseason stock market. All that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. I am your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, the Edmonton Oilers at training camp today cut their roster, basically their skating groups, in half today. Half of them were in Rogers Place. Half of them was at the District Community Arena. And it seemed to have intention behind it. We will talk about those groups in just a second. Also on today's episode, we are going to talk about the preseason stock market, whose stock rose and whose stock has fallen after the 4-0 loss to the Calgary Flames in Calgary last night. And finally, we are going to end today's show with some little news and bits here from the Edmonton Oilers today, as there were several cuts from the Edmonton Oilers camp today. We will talk about those and what those cuts mean for the future of those players and the Edmonton Oilers. All that and so much more in today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcasts. Today, we are starting off with those skating groups at Rogers Place, as the NHL group and the AHL group has basically been decided here at camp. As at Rogers Place, the NHL group, or basically the unofficial NHL group, Jay Woodcroft basically confirmed it in his press conference today. But the NHL group skated at Rogers Place, the AHL group skated at the DCA. And so with that comes basically the news of who's going to and who is still in the race for those last spots on the team and who has basically been etched into the Baker's Field lineup. Here is who was skating in Rogers Place this morning. The first line of Evander Kane, Connor McDavid, and Kyler Yamamoto, which happy 24th birthday to Kyler Yamamoto today. The second line skating was Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl, and Jesse Puljujärvi, who we will get back to in just a little bit. On the third line was Ryan McLeod, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Warren Foegele. And on the fourth line was Matthias Janmark, Devin Shore, and Derek Ryan. Also skating with the forwards, the fifth line almost of the Edmonton Oilers right now was Dylan Holloway, Brad Malone, and Jake Virtanen. On the back end for the Edmonton Oilers defensively, Darnell Nurse was skating with Cody Ceci, as Cody Ceci is now skating again with the team. Brett Kulak and Evan Bouchard, Philip Broberg and Tyson Barrie. Ryan Murray was skating along with Dmitry Samorukov, I like that pairing, and Marcus Niemelainen skating alongside Jason Demers. The two goaltenders, of course, at skating camp or at Rogers Place today, Stuart Skinner and Jack Campbell. Where we are going to start off with our little conversation is a continuation from our conversation yesterday about that third line. Now, Jesse Puljujärvi has played a little bit on that third line, but we now see Ryan McLeod, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Warren Foegele on that third line. Now, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Ryan McLeod were bouncing around between positions, the two of them. McLeod did take some shifts at center, did take some shifts at left wing. Now, the interesting thing also is Warren Foegele on that right side. As mentioned, the Edmonton Oilers are comfortable with him on that right side. He did skate there and play there when he played in Carolina. So that gives the Edmonton Oilers a little more comfortability on that right side. We are going to also talk about Dylan Holloway. Just a fantastic game again. Still skating with the Edmonton Oilers, obviously, as he's going to be on the team here. The real interesting thing will end up being who technically doesn't make the opening day roster, but that mostly will be because of the salary cap. Will it be Devon Shore, Derek Ryan? Really, I'm not sure. But Dylan Holloway is going to be on the Edmonton Oilers this year. Once again, another fantastic game against Calgary last night. Every game he plays, he's just been one of, if not the best players on the ice at all times. Him and Ryan McLeod were fantastic last night for the Oilers. Now, the interesting thing is Jake Virtanen once again in game, basically invisible. A lot of people on Twitter have been going out and saying, I'm basically surprised that he's still here this morning and skating with the team. Not fantastic showing, or not a fantastic showing for Jake Virtanen last night. Really, this must be his last chance for the Edmonton Oilers. I assume he'll play on Friday in Edmonton, and that will be the final decider. We will talk more about him in a little bit, but surprised to still see him today, honestly. Was skating with the NHL side today. Not sure why exactly, but he was there. I guess technically, really the Bakersfield skate was more to get a familiarity with the Bakersfield players. So it makes sense why he wasn't there. Also, just to finish off on today's skate with the NHL squad, Philip Broberg getting a lot of love from his coach, Jay Woodcroft, today. As Jay Woodcroft said today, he is very comfortable with where Philip Broberg is. Weird set of words. English is a fun language. With where Philip Broberg is with his development right now. As he mentioned, he's not really focused on the offensive output from Philip Broberg. As he said, the biggest thing for young defensemen coming into the league is making sure that they are comfortable playing against the world's best forwards. And that's what he's focusing on with Philip Broberg on the during camp this year. And he said he has been impressed with him so far. One last note to mention, brought up in today's press conference as well, as Ryan Murray, presumably people thought that he had no familiarity with Jay Woodcroft at all playing for him. But Ryan Murray, something was shocking to me, is that Ryan Murray was on that under-23 team at the World Cup of Hockey in 2016, I believe that was. That shocked me and jarred me to how old and how young how old I am, but how young he is still as well. Under 23 in 2016. I was shocked by that. But Jay Woodcroft did coach that team there and is familiar with Ryan Murray because of it. So that is a nice little thing to have there for the Edmonton Oilers and Ryan Murray, a consummate professional. And as Jay Woodcroft emphasized is probably the better word than exemplified, but emphasize is Ryan Murray is a Stanley Cup winner. People cannot take that away from him. Even if he didn't play at all in the playoffs, he was still around a winning culture, which is what the Edmonton Oilers are hoping Ryan Murray will bring to the Edmonton Oilers this year. Alrighty, let's take a look at the preseason stock markets for the Edmonton Oilers after their 4-0 loss in Calgary. Quick little spoiler alert, 2 of the names were already on the stock market last game after Seattle, but we do have one extra name on there and some interesting notes about those 2 players who've already been on the market. We will talk about that in just a second, but first I want to tell you about our partners over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including MLB, NHL, NBA, MMA, UFC, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alrighty, moving on to the preseason stock market for the Edmonton Oilers after a tough 4-0 loss in Calgary to the Calgary Flames. Realistically, the Edmonton Oilers played their AHL roster, so a little bit tough to evaluate some of the players, but there are some interesting things to talk about there. Plus, the Calgary Flames did play basically their NHL lineup, which is interesting considering where one of the stock market players are currently sitting in regards to their career, and they didn't do too well. But let's start off with the positive as Dylan Holloway once again raises his stock price or stock market price, stock in general, as Dylan Holloway at times again looked like one of the best players on the ice, if not the best player on the ice at times. But the biggest thing for Dylan Holloway will be whether or not he is able to use his feet and speed to separate himself from NHL talent, which he did numerous times against guys like Nikita Zadorov, Noah Hanifin, guys like that, but also his physicality. Yes, he only had one hit last night, but throughout the entire preseason and in Penticton as well, he has really emphasized his physical work. And again, he was still, even though he had one hit in general, or officially is a better way to put it, he was still physical either way. The other thing, too, from Dylan Holloway, the second highest time on ice for the Edmonton Oilers forwards last night from Dylan Holloway, behind only Ryan McLeod. So telling you a lot about the trust and just about the usage as well for Dylan Holloway coming into and coming out of last night as well. Now, going to the stock that has dropped, and you want to give a player the benefit of the doubt. You don't want to really pile on, I guess, but Jake Virtanen was just invisible again for the Edmonton Oilers. And the thing is that was a roster relatively made up of AHLers against a team that was made up of relatively all of their NHLers. So that was a big moment for Jake Virtanen to not only show himself to his organization, but also show that he can keep up with NHL players. And he failed horrendously. Jake Virtanen was brought into the Edmonton Oilers to play defensively, to be something that the Edmonton Oilers didn't have. Be physical, also have an offensive touch, play a 200-foot game, potentially get time on the penalty kill. You know how much time he had on the penalty kill last night again? 0. He didn't step on the ice at all shorthanded. So he's not physical. He didn't even register a hit last night. He had one shot on goal and a blocked shot. You have guys like Luke Esposito, James Hamblin, Dylan Holloway. Look at the guys who were sent down today who are still doing more than what Jake Virtanen was doing. And Jake Virtanen was given specifically a chance to make an NHL team. not an AHL club, not signed an NHL deal. Well, yes, sign an NHL deal still. But when all of these other guys who have been career AHLers, who have been fighting for and playing on amateur contracts and AHL contracts, and Jake Virtanen comes in and does literally nothing on a PTO, nothing. He may have gotten an assist, luckily, in the 4-0 game that the Edmonton Oilers had. But other than that, he did nothing. His stock has gone so far down, basically just a when is it going to happen type deal for Jake Virtanen and his PTO expiration. Finally, the final stock that has gone up for the Edmonton Oilers. Yes, Dylan Holloway and Jake Virtanen were on the last stock market report, but Calvin Pickard wasn't. Pickard, excuse me. I need to get out of... I've always called him Calvin Pickard. I need to get out of that. It's Calvin Pickard. Calvin Pickard had a fantastic game for the Edmonton Oilers last night, especially considering he was peppered from the word go. 16 saves on 17 shots, and the only goal was just a tough goal, just jammed in from Daryl Sutter's son, Brett Sutter, and still, it wasn't a bad goal to give up. It was a hard-fought play, and still, every time Calvin Pickard was on top of his game. Like, genuinely, if you were to put Calvin Pickard in a game at all this year, after watching that, I am very comfortable with Calvin Pickard being in the Edmonton Oilers crease at most time. I mean, I'm not saying that going, oh yeah, he needs to start or whatever. But if things do go awry and Calvin Pickard does need to start or play a game, after last night and after what we've seen throughout camp, I feel pretty confident with that. Now, the other interesting thing is that he essentially, or it looks like, has won that third spot for the Edmonton Oilers. Why is that important? Well, we will get to that in just a second, and why the crease, the third spot, is Calvin Pickard's, seemingly Calvin Pickard's right now, in just a second. But first, I just want to thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute NHL podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world with Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Alrighty, and finally today we are going to finish up with the Edmonton Oilers moves from today, as the Edmonton Oilers have made numerous moves and cuts from the main roster and training camp today, starting off with Matvei Petrov, as he was sent back to the North Bay Battalion of the OHL today. Now, he did have eligibility to go play for Bakersfield this year, but him and the Edmonton Oilers felt it was best to return back to the OHL. Again, 90 points in the OHL last year, 40 goals, 50 assists. If the only way to go is up for the kid. And again, Matvei Petrov, too, had a very solid game against Calgary last night, drew numerous penalties. In fact, I thought the trip on him, which led to a penalty or power play for the Edmonton Oilers, and then he got laid out from behind because of a little pouty boy, and he didn't get a penalty from behind into the board. It was a dirty play. Like, he genuinely could have got hurt because somebody lost their temper in an exhibition game for a tripping call on a 19-year-old kid. Good for you, buddy. But either way, Matvei Petrov was all right, played on that power play. Obviously, no goal for them there. But Petrov back to North Bay, Ontario for the good old Brampton Battalion. Shout out Brampton. I remember the good old Brian Pitton days. That's my Brampton battalion. But also other names, other cuts from the Edmonton Oilers today. Ty Tullio and Ryan Fanti, which is why Calvin Pickard being the third string goaltender is important right now, because seemingly Ryan Fanti and Tyler Tullio have been sent and reassigned to Bakersfield for this season. That means it seems like, again, Calvin Pickard winning that spot over Ryan Fanti. If you do remember from a couple episodes ago, from the start of training camp, that was one of the position battles to watch, was that third string goaltending spot. And Calvin Pickard, not Picard. Calvin Pickard won that spot from Ryan Fanti. Even if it was just from last night's game, it makes sense. Also, a couple more moves from the Edmonton Oilers. Philip Ngaris was also released from his amateur tryout and has been sent to Bakersfield as well. Will play in Baco there. He didn't get into any games in preseason, if I'm not mistaken. He was a draft pick from the Edmonton Oilers a couple years ago, or for the Edmonton Oilers a couple years ago. Still getting his footing in the professionals, or the pros, I guess, or as a pro. So a couple of years still for Philip Ngaris if he is looking to make the team. Well, obviously he's looking to make the team, but still a couple of years yet from Ngaris. And finally, the Edmonton Oilers have also released from a PTO. No, don't worry, don't get too excited. Dino Cambites, Darian Keeld, and Yanni Caldas have all been released from their PTOs and will report to Bakersfield as well. Bakersfield has been shaping up, it seems like, and Bakersfield camp will start pretty soon. We are around the corner from that camp as well. They start a couple weeks after the NHL does. It'll be interesting to see who follows as well when Jake Virtanen is released from his PTO, because I mean, if that's contract worthy, then sign me up, because I can't even skate and I might be more impactful. Anyways, either way, that was rude. I apologize. But either way, let's call it there, as the Edmonton Oilers have another game tomorrow night in Edmonton, as the Edmonton Oilers go up against the Calgary Flames in Edmonton. I imagine it'll be a shift from the NHL roster in Calgary that the Calgary Flames deployed to an AHL roster from the Calgary Flames, and the Edmonton Oilers deploying that AHL contract, or AHL roster in Calgary, will become an NHL roster in Edmonton on Friday night. Also something to look forward to as well over the weekend. It seems like, maybe look forward is the wrong word here, but it sounds like the Edmonton Oilers will also be making cuts over the weekend, and that is when most of the bigger calls and the tough calls will be made, is over the weekend. We will see the battles and how they shaped up at the end of those games and at the end of those cuts. So we will see more of what the Edmonton Oilers roster will look like heading into opening day. Let's call it there. I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe and play La Bamba, baby.